Hi, learners and leaders. I am Aunt Bindi from Aunt Bindi's Bookshelf, and I'm so excited you're here. We have been reading the book Animalia, and we've been learning all about animals. One of the most exciting things that we learned about animals is that every animal belongs to a class. Not a class like you belong to at school, but a class like a category. You want to learn about what makes each class special? Come on, let's go. In Animalia, there are all different kinds of animals. Some of them are imaginary, but most of them are real. Did you know that every real animal gets sorted into different classes? And the reason that we sort into different classes is to help scientists organize the animals. Imagine if you threw every animal in the world into one big pot. That would be a crazy soup, and it would make it really hard to pick out specific animals. Classes organize animals based on their characteristics. Characteristics is a fancy word that means things we know about an animal. In our case, characteristics can be things like long hair or short hair. They can be things like blue eyes or brown eyes, things like super shy or really outgoing. Our characteristics are what make us who we are. In the case of classes, scientists take animals with similar characteristics and group them into classes. There are 6 major animal classes: mammals, birds, fish, reptiles, amphibians, and invertebrates. 6 major classes. This is my dog Maisie, and Maisie is a mammal. Mammal is just a fancy word that means an animal with fur, that gives birth to live young, that has milk glands, and that is a complex thinker that can think really well. There are 5 characteristics that make a mammal a mammal. First, fur or hair. It's really easy to tell the fur and hair on Maisie, right? 'Cause she has fur all over her. But if you look at your arms or your legs, you have fur all over you too. We are mammals. The second thing that makes a mammal is that they give birth to live young. When Maisie was born, she didn't come out in an egg. She came out fully formed, squirmy, wiggly, ready to go. When she was born, another thing that makes mammals mammals is that they drink milk from their mom. So when she was born, she didn't eat puppy food right away, just like you didn't eat people food right away. Mammals give milk to their babies. That's one of the things that makes them mammals. One more thing that makes mammals mammals is that they're warm-blooded. Warm-blooded is just a fancy word that means that mammals can regulate their body temperature no matter what the air temperature is. So even if it's really cold outside, you're still always the same temperature in your body. You might feel cold, but your body is always the same temperature. That means you're warm-blooded. When I snuggle up to Maisie, I can feel how warm she is because she's warm-blooded. And the final thing that makes a mammal is that we're all complex thinkers. Maisie is so smart. She can sit, she can stay, she can come. She has different tricks that she can do, tricks that I could never teach a goldfish, right? She is a complex thinker. She has a pretty developed brain. That's part of what makes her a mammal. The next class is birds. We all know what a bird looks like, but what makes a bird a bird? What are the major characteristics of the class bird? Feathers. All birds have feathers. Some are bright and shiny, and others help provide camouflage. Wings. All birds have wings, even though not all birds fly. Penguins, for example, use their wings as flippers in the water, but they don't use them to fly. Beak. All birds have beaks. In fact, we can usually tell what a bird eats by the shape of its beak. Eggs. Birds don't give birth to babies, they lay eggs, right? They then care for the eggs until they hatch, and even a bit after they hatch until they're ready to leave the nest. And finally, a lightweight skeleton. A bird needs lightweight bones to be able to fly. Some good examples of birds are penguins, robins, ostrich, ducks, and geese. The next class is fish. Like birds, we all know what a fish looks like, but what do all fish have in common? Cold-blooded. Cold-blooded is a fancy word that means that these animals can't regulate their body temperature. If it's cold outside, their body temperature drops. Their body temperature varies depending on the temperature of the air or water around them. They live in water. Fish can't survive out of the water. They can't breathe air like you or I do. Gills to breathe. Fish can't breathe air because they use gills to breathe. Water passes over the gills and they pull oxygen out of that water. Swim bladders. Swim bladders are what help keep fish floating. What if they had to tread water all day? That would be awful. Fins. Fins are what fish use to move around underwater. Some good examples of fish are goldfish, trout, clownfish, and piranhas. Remember, whales and dolphins aren't fish, they're mammals. Our next class is the reptile class. The reptile class includes things like iguanas, snakes, alligators, geckos, turtles. That's a wide variety. So what do they all have in common? Scales. All reptiles are covered in dry, scaly skin. This is actually how we know frogs are not reptiles because their skin is moist. Egg laying. Like birds, reptiles lay eggs, but unlike birds, most reptiles just leave their eggs behind and don't care for their babies after they're born. Cold-blooded. Reptiles can't keep themselves warm, and that's why you'll often see them lying in the sun. They're vertebrates. Vertebrate is a fancy word that means has a backbone. We're vertebrates. Feel down your back, and you can feel there's a bone right there. That's your spine. That bone is what makes us vertebrates. Finally, reptiles have lungs. Reptiles have lungs. They breathe air just like us. Some reptiles live in the water like sea turtles, but they have to come up for breath. Amphibians are another class. Amphibian is just a fancy word that means things like frogs, toads, or salamanders. Things that change from the time they're babies until they're adults and live near water. What makes all amphibians amphibians? Moist skin. Reptiles have dry, scaly skin, but amphibians have wet skin. In fact, they ooze a kind of a snot or a mucus out their skin to keep it wet. Their skin's wet because they can actually breathe through it, and if they dry out, they can die. Unshelled eggs. Bird and reptile eggs have a hard shell, but not amphibian eggs. They have a kind of a soft, jello-y kind of a shell. They grow legs as an adult. Amphibians look very, very different when they're born than they do as adults. The babies of frogs and toads are called tadpoles, and they don't have legs. They have a tail and they swim around like a little fish. As they grow up, their tail goes away and they grow legs and look more like the frogs that we recognize. They live on land and water. Amphibians live on land, but they usually stay close to or even in the water. Remember how we said they can breathe through their skin? They need to stay close to the water to keep that skin moist. They're carnivores. Carnivore is a fancy word that means they only eat meat. No fruit, no veggies, only meat. In the case of frogs, they can eat things like bugs, snakes, bats, other frogs. They eat a lot of different things, but none of it is fruit or veggies, only meat. Whew, we made it to our last class. Our last class is the invertebrate class. Invertebrate is just a fancy word that means has no backbone. Vertebrate, like us, means has a backbone. Invertebrate means no backbone here. Invertebrates are a huge class of animals. In fact, 97%, that means 97 out of 100, of all animals are invertebrates. That's a lot of animals. And pretty much the only thing they have in common is that they don't have a backbone. Some different types of invertebrates are insects, jellyfish, worms, coral, starfish, and spiders. Like I said, huge variety. Some of those animals have a hard shell to protect them, like insects and spiders. That hard shell is called an exoskeleton. An exoskeleton is a fancy word that means the skeleton is outside of the body. Exo, outside, skeleton, skeleton outside. The exoskeleton protects the animal and gives support to the interior of their body. Holy cow, that's a lot of classes. Let's review them all. We have mammals, animals like us or my beautiful dog Maisie, birds, fish, reptiles, things like snakes, turtles, and alligators, amphibians, things like frogs, toads, and salamanders, and invertebrates, all the other animals that don't have backbones. While we were going over the classes, we learned a bunch of fancy words. Let's review them all. Characteristics is a fancy word that means things about us. In our case, it can be short hair, long hair, blue eyes, brown eyes, super smiley and sunny, or a little more thoughtful. Characteristics are what make us who we are. Mammal is a fancy word for an animal that has hair, gives birth to live babies, feeds their babies milk, and is a complex thinker. When you think of an animal, probably you're thinking of a mammal. We're mammals. Warm-blooded means we make our own heat. Our body temperature is the same no matter what the air temperature is around us. Cold-blooded means that those animals cannot regulate their body temperature. Their body temperature changes depending on what the air or water around them is like. Vertebrate is a fancy word that means has a backbone. We have spines, we're vertebrates. Invertebrate is the opposite of vertebrate. It just means no backbone. A lot of invertebrates have an exoskeleton or no backbone at all. Amphibian is a fancy word that means things like frogs, toads, and salamanders. They start out as one thing and change their body pretty substantially as they grow. Carnivores. Carnivore is a fancy word that means they only eat meat. No fruits or veggies, extra pepperoni on their pizza. Exoskeleton. Exoskeleton is a skeleton outside of the body. That skeleton helps protect those animals and gives them support for their interior. Whoa, learners and leaders, that was a lot. And you learned it all. I'm so proud of you. What should we learn next? Whatever it is, I can't wait to learn with you. Remember to like and subscribe, share my video with a friend so they can come along too, and have your grown-ups check out the lesson plans on my website. I'll link it below. Have a great day, learners and leaders.